Part 3. Belena's parents were waiting for her back at the castle, and they asked her to join them so they could talk in private. Inside the queen's bedchamber, Valerie read out the message, which had been delivered by a courier less than an hour past. Belena listened attentively, but afterward she kept standing still. So surprised was she by what was just heard. To His Majesty, King Alban of Vandan and Elgon, the message went. It is to my knowledge that your eldest daughter, the Crown Princess Belena, is soon to come of age, and that she must also soon be wed to a suitable husband of royal blood. My eldest son and heir, the Crown Prince Argo, is as chance would have it, not yet betrothed to a bride. Thus it is my wish that the two of them should, for the sake of uniting our realms and forming a new formidable royal lineage, to be joined in marriage. My son is already en route to your palace, and by the time you've received this message, his arrival should be imminent. Please accord him the hospitality and respect befitting of a man of his noble status. This was followed by a signature which read, His Imperial Highness Malmo IV, High Emperor of the lands of Solis in Rheir. Well then, said Alban, breaking the uncomfortable silence after Valerie had finished reading. What have you to say to that, Belena? He was sitting on Valerie's shoulder, a few strands of her hair tied around his body, as usual. I don't know what to say, his daughter answered, quite taken aback. She sat down on the bed next to her mother and took her by the hands. Mother, does this mean... must I really marry this Prince Argo? What if I don't like him? What if he doesn't like me? Does he even know I'm, a giant? I suppose so, Valerie said, trying to sound reassuring. Whether or not you'll like each other, though, I suppose we could but wait and see. Solis is a great maritime empire, far to the west, said Alban, who had once been there when he was still a teenager. Its riches and might are legendary, and few are the rulers who would dare declare war on its armies. But I don't want that, Belena cried. I just want a husband who would love me, the way you love Mom, and who wouldn't mind being with me, even though he's only the size of my finger. She seemed so upset that Valerie took her and held her tight, cradling her head against her own chest. It's all right, my darling, Valerie murmured. You're a young lady now, not a child, and you can make your own choices as you wish to make them. Whether or not you marry Argo isn't important. What matters is that you follow the choice which brings you happiness. Forget about those riches and those armies your father was talking about, and let's focus on what's really important. Your 18th birthday, for example. I agree, Alban added as he looked down into Belena's watery eyes. When Prince Argo arrives, I shall receive him, alone. I shall tell him all about you and explain to him exactly how you feel about the situation. If he still wishes to marry you, I'll introduce you. So just calm yourself, sweetie, and think about how you wish to celebrate the most important birthday of your life. I will, Daddy. Please forgive me. I don't mean to get so worked up about this. It's just that... well, I've never had to deal with anything like this before, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Valerie gave her a kiss on the forehead and reassured her. We understand, dear, and we won't leave you to sort things out on your own, rest assured. But one day you will be queen, and you'll be forced to deal with much harder decisions than whether or not to marry some foreign prince. So consider this a test, to prepare you for the trials of adult life, and an opportunity to learn more about yourself and what you're capable of. All right? Belena nodded, still not completely at ease, but feeling a bit more confident. She left, and the king and queen exchanged looks. "Do you think it's too soon for her?" Valerie asked. "Perhaps we should tell this emperor that she's not ready to be married off yet. I'm sure he'll understand. Valerie, she's a grown woman now, not a child. If she's not ready now, when will she ever be? We have to expose her to these kinds of situations, or she'll never be able to rule after you and I are gone. I know how protective you are of her, but it's not just her future we should be concerned about. The future of the kingdom is at stake as well." "Now you're being a bit melodramatic. But you're right, of course. Let's just wait and see what'll happen. I've got a feeling that our little Belena may yet surprise us." Valden sat on the windowsill of the dining room and watched the sun set behind the distant trees. It had taken him a half an hour to climb up there, and he didn't know how long it would take for him to get back down. But right now he just wanted to savor the peaceful moment. He turned his gaze eastward, where he knew the great Cairneoan mountains lay. Beyond the horizon. His destination. Or rather, their destination. Yes, he would be traveling with his little sister Sylvie, and there was absolutely nothing he could do about it. His mother was adamant about the matter, and Sylvie herself was as eager to get going as he was. The only difference was she was actually looking forward to spending some alone time, as she called it, with her teeny-weeny baby brother, while he was dreading the thought of having to be carried by her day and night. They were leaving after Belena's 18th birthday, an event he was actually looking forward to, since he agreed to help his older sister plan the event. They would miss her friend Arlie's wedding, though, but then Valden never really been that close to the girl anyway. And Sylvie, though she would have liked to attend, was just too ecstatic about traveling the wilds, with Valden in her possession, to really care. "Daydreaming again?" The loud voice in Valden's ears nearly caused him to fall off the edge of the windowsill. He whirled around, and there was Sylvie, grinning broadly, her long golden hair hanging in an untidy manner, as usual. She knelt down and rested her elbows on both sides of him, leaving him no chance of escape. "What do you want?" he asked, trying to sound commanding. "Shouldn't you be preparing for the journey?" "Oh no, I can do that later. There isn't much to prepare for anyway. All you want to do is go trudging around in some dull mountains. Why can't we go somewhere nice, like the sea?" "I've never been to the sea." "Well, that's too bad. Dad said I get to decide where we should go, but if you don't like my choice, then don't come along. You can stay here and play with your stupid dolls some more." "Aw, you're so cute when you get angry," she chuckled. "Did you think you can get rid of me that easy, you little baby? If I'm not there to protect you, you'll get eaten by the first troll you meet. Oh, and you might not know this, but I stopped playing with dolls years ago." She darted her hand toward him, and he ducked down instinctively, even though he knew it would be no good. There was nothing he could do once she'd grabbed him, and he knew better than to try and fight back. Then she would probably just humiliate him even further. "Oh, don't look at me like that," she implored, as he glared up at her, caught between her finger and thumb like a piece of meat between two chopsticks. "Let me guess. You're going to tell me I need to grow up, right?" "Why bother?" he spat back. "You're never going to grow up." "I think you both need to grow up," a girl's voice interrupted. They looked down and saw Arlie standing right next to Sylvie's left toe. Still pinching her brother tightly, the young princess reached down and picked her up. She then put Arlie and Valden in the palm of her left hand and began walking to the kitchen. "You shouldn't treat him like this, Sylvie," Arlie said as they walked. She looked over at Valden, who had an utterly embarrassed and dejected look on his face. "A princess must be kind and courteous to all of those around her, no matter what their size, especially if they're family." Sylvie looked guilty for a moment, but she quickly thought of a way to shift the blame. "I know, but he's the one who's always being rude to me and bossing me around like I'm his little slave girl." "Oh, shut up," Valden yelled. "Stop lying about me. Arlie's right. You're always the one who looks for trouble. I'm glad you're not the eldest, because you'd make the worst queen in history of... Hey, what are you doing? Sylvie, no, don't! Without listening to a word he was saying, Sylvie laid her brother on the top of her wrist. She then rolled up the sleeve of her dress, wrapping him tightly inside, all the way up to her elbow. Valden was now trapped inside a cocoon of fabric, and he could barely be heard. Sylvie looked back at Arlie, and her grin disappeared when she saw the look of disapproval on her friend's face. "What?" she said innocently. "He was yelling at me. You heard him, didn't you?" Arlie sighed, glad she didn't have to accompany these two on their upcoming excursion. She didn't think she could handle even one day of having to babysit Sylvie. "Well, I hope you can sort this all out on your trip," she said at last. "Good luck on your journey, Princess. Looks like you two are going to need all the luck you can get just to make it past day 1. Sylvie sniffed. She knew exactly what Arlie meant, but she was determined to prove her wrong. "I'll soon teach Valden to behave himself," she thought to herself. "By the end of the trip, we're going to get along just fine." A few weeks later, after Valden and Sylvie had already departed, Prince Argo of Solis arrived at the Vandanian castle, along with his entourage. This consisted of several young noblemen, a few priests of Solis's sun-worshipping religion, and about 200 soldiers of the Imperial Guard, clad in impressive-looking armor, and surrounding their leader and his friends quite effectively. At the back came a procession of slaves bearing gifts from the Emperor Malmo. Alban directed the slaves to a side entrance, where Valerie would be receiving their gifts. The priests and 50 guardsmen accompanied them, after a command from the crown prince. Argo himself then rode up to the front door, with his aristocratic friends and all of the remaining soldiers following. Alban had been expected his daughter's suitor to be a remarkably young man, but he was still taken rather aback. The crown prince was almost 7 feet tall, he guessed, handsome and well-built, and wearing the finest royal garb, adorned with the coat of arms of his empire. He had short black hair and appeared to be in his early 20s. "Welcome," the king said, as Argo and his nobles dismounted. "I am Alban, king and co-regent of this land. You must be the crown prince." "Of course I am," the young man announced. "So, you're the king, eh? I'm sorry, I was expecting someone a bit bigger, up with this enormous castle and all. Then I'm sorry to disappoint you. This castle was built by a long-gone race of giants. My wife and daughters are the only known living descendants." "And you like having a giant for a wife?" Argo sounded dumbfounded. "Were there no normal women for you to choose from?" "There were. Quite a few, too. But once I really began to know Valerie, I knew she was the one for me. In any case, seeing as how you're here to ask for my daughter's hand in marriage, I'd imagine the notion of having a giantess wife appeals to you as well." The prince simply gazed silently at him, and Alban began to wonder if it would be a good idea for him and Belena to meet. As they passed through the 250-foot-high wooden front door and began making their way towards the throne room, the men from Solis grew quieter and quieter. They all felt, Alban imagined, like insects on the floor, dwarfed by the gargantuan furnishings around them. He was glad that Sylvie wasn't here. Though she could be sweet and polite when she wanted to, his youngest had an unfortunate tendency to frighten foreign visitors, just for a little joke, as she put it. Beneath one of the giant tables, Argo saw an immense 30-foot-long wooden figure, almost like a fallen statue, and cloth like a soldier. He asked Alban about it, and was told that it was just one of Princess Sylvie's dolls, which she must have dropped there and forgotten about. "She could be so thoughtless sometimes," the king laughed. "I'll have to talk with her when she returns from her adventure. In any case, a 14-year-old shouldn't be playing with dolls anymore, but she just can't seem to grow out of it. As he spoke, one of Argo's friends pulled him aside and whispered in his ear. "Perhaps we should return home, sire," the man insisted. "I have a very bad feeling about this. The princess is only a girl," Argo interrupted. "And I'm not frightened of a young girl, Rheir. I will make her my wife, and that shall be the end of it. I'm not letting my father think I'm a coward, understood?" "Yes, sire, absolutely. But what if—" "Shut up! I think we've arrived." The great throne room was 500 yards long, with a staggeringly high ceiling. Most of its ceiling was covered by a vast red carpet, and it was along this that the men walked. They eventually reached the queen's throne, 150 feet tall and intricately decorated. Alban bid the prince and his company to wait, while he went off and fetched the princess. "Won't you be here as well?" Argo asked. "Oh, no. Forgive me, Your Highness, but I have other pressing duties to attend to. Furthermore, my daughter requested that I be absent during your meeting. She is quite nervous, you see, and doesn't want me to ruin her special moment by making an inappropriate comment. I believe she's eager to prove, too, that she can conduct herself regally, and that her father's worries are all for nothing." He winked and smiled. But, the prince babbled. "Calm down, Prince Argo," Alban said, gripping him by the arm. "She's no different than the maidens in your own great city. If you find her great size to be too much, just relax. You'll get used to it. She's just as full of anxiety as you are, believe me, and she seems eager to start off on the best of terms. Now excuse me for a moment, and I shall fetch her for you." Belena turned around in front of the mirror for the 100th time, making absolutely sure that her appearance was as perfect as could be. She wanted to make a good impression on Prince Argo, and was convinced that the tiniest imperfection would lead to the greatest disappointment. She had spent all day getting her makeup and hair flawless. Ruby red lipstick, not too much eyeliner, tasteful jeweled earrings, a gold band to secure her hair. The list of necessities went on and on. She had chosen a magnificent orange gown to wear, which hugged her figure nicely, and showed just the right amount of cleavage, while still giving her a royal and splendid appearance. Along with this came high-heeled shoes, velvet gloves, and a sash in matching colors. The final touch was a giant pink flower, 5 feet across, which she tucked into her hair. She turned towards her tiny handmaidens, who were standing on the dressing table, and helped her prepare. "How do I look?" she asked nervously. Not too bad, I hope." "Your Highness," said Karina, a short, pretty girl of 17. "You look lovely beyond words. Every man I know would be speechless just to look at you." "Really?" "No question about it, Princess," said Marinette, Karina's 14-year-old sister. "The prince will be smitten the instant he lays eyes on you." "I couldn't agree more," added Arlie. "You've never looked as beautiful as you do now, Belena. And don't be afraid. If he doesn't fancy you, the fault lies with him." At that moment, another servant girl came running into the room. She stared at the princess for a few seconds, before remembering to deliver her message. "The prince awaits you, Your Highness," she said excitedly. "He's in the throne room." Belena gave a little gasp, but managed to stay composed. She lifted her friends carefully off the table and set them down by her feet. Then, looking down on them with her great height, she said, "Wish me luck," and hurried out of the bedroom. She entered the throne room from a side door behind the great throne, so she did not immediately see the prince and his entourage. But then she noticed a small crowd of men waiting near the foot of the steps leading to the throne, and she nearly turned around in shock. "I thought it would be just the two of us," she thought to herself. "But there's so many of them. What do I do? No, I won't turn back. I will be brave and talk to him, and I won't let them see how nervous I am." When the men saw the giantess approaching them, many of them gasped and even screamed. 2 of the 3 noblemen fainted, and several dozen of soldiers instinctively drew their swords. And Prince Argo himself turned deathly pale and gripped the nearest bystander by the arm. No, he babbled. No, I can't do this. I can't do this. We have to go home. We have to leave. He swallowed hard as the immense young princess came even closer. She towered above them like a pillar of fire, and even after she had gracefully knelt down before them, she was still as tall as a good-sized tree. The men retreated slightly as she leant forward a bit. The face looking down on them was as beautiful as that of a goddess, but it was 25 feet from forehead to chin. While the sight of such an enormous person might be upsetting for most men who had never seen one, the fact that this giant was a woman, no, a girl, was more than Argo could possibly tolerate. He knew at once what his men, his soldiers, subjects would think of him if he married her, and they were right. No worthy man of Solis would ever let his woman, naturally his inferior, surpass him in anything, particularly not such masculine tributes as strength and marital prowess. He would be known as the king who needed his wife to protect him from the eager hands of their infant daughter, and that was simply not an option. I'm never marrying her, he swore to himself. She's not even remotely human, and I won't let myself be ordered around by her. I won't. Greetings, said the princess, a charming smile upon her lips. Welcome to Vandan, my lords. I am Princess Belena, and it is a great honor for me to finally meet you. Which one of you is the prince? There was no answer for several moments, before one of the men stepped a pace forward and responded with, I am Prince Argo. Belena looked down at the tall, attractive man. He certainly looked like one of the princes from her stories, but he did not act like one at all. Instead of being the courageous yet romantic hero she had been expecting him to be, he instead stared up at her with what appeared to be a mix of mistrust, fear, and repulsion. She felt her heart sink in her chest, but remained determined to try to win his approval. I know how I must appear to you, my lord, she said, but I am not in the least a monster like the giants of old. Your size does not mean that I cannot love you, and I beg you not to reject me based on my size either. If you would care to know me a bit better, I assure you—
I've seen enough, he interrupted, and I've made my choice. Did you think I'd consent to living a life with you? You're not in the least bit of my idea of a wife. You would have more luck trying to marry an ogre.
He began to laugh, and several of his men did also.
I mean, just look at you, he continued. Would any of you men ever consider marrying something like this? I'm sorry, but I won't allow myself to become a giant's plaything like your father.
She simply stared at him in mute shock, unable to understand why he was being so callous, her expression close to tears. Prince Argo, feeling more than pleased with himself for putting this stupid giant girl in her place, carried on belittling her.
How sad it must be to be the last of such a monstrous race, he said. You'll never experience the pleasure of having a man between your legs, will you, princess? Hell, I'd wager an ogre would start to look very tempting not too long from now.
Her oversized hand began to descend towards him, and he hastily stepped back a few paces and drew his long sword.
Don't you dare touch me! He yelled furiously, waving his sword about. I'm not your little doll, you brute! I am a crown prince, and you are not my equal! The only possible use I could have for you would be to work in one of our mines! Although being a girl, you'd probably do nothing but cry and complain.
He kept yelling at her, but Belena did not listen to his words. She couldn't. She was beyond the point where she cared. Of course, she always considered the possibility that her prince wouldn't be able to love her, but a true gentleman would still tell her so in a very respectful manner, and this little louse was anything but. her heart completely in pieces. She wanted nothing more than to run back to her room and cry until she felt better. The beginning of a tear formed in her eye, but suddenly disappeared as her will changed. I won't let this happen, she convinced herself. I am a lady and a princess, and no man has any right to treat me like this, not even a king. If I just let him leave, this so-called prince will continue to treat other women like dirt if they don't please him. Well, I'm going to teach him a lesson, and if he doesn't apologize afterwards, he'll regret it. Once more she reached for him with her hand, and once more he waved his sword at her and yelled. But she pinched the blade of his sword between her fingertips and yanked it out of his grip and tossed it into a far corner of the room. Then gently, but not too gently, she wrapped her fingers around him and, to his utter dismay, picked him up. She stood up and watched in satisfaction as the soldiers on the ground scurried around like ants, unable to help their prince in any way. They were too afraid to even come near her. "Put me down!" Argo kept shouting amongst a multitude of curses. He was completely immobilized. Only his head and shoulders stuck out the top of her curled-up fist, and his great strength was less than nothing compared to hers. "You can't do this! Lieutenant!" he called down to one of his soldiers. "Attack her! Make her put me down!" Belena silenced him with her fingertip, twice as large as his entire face. Seeing how helpless he was made her feel a lot more confident, and she spoke to him casually and without a hint of nervousness. "Not so bossy, are you, little prince?" she said. "I don't know what exactly you men from Solis are famous for, but it obviously isn't chivalry. Your men might think you to be an awesome leader and all that, but from up here, it's obvious that you're nothing more than a nasty, spoiled little rodent. I mean, how low you must be when even a young girl could overcome you so easily." Turning around, she left the soldiers and noblemen and headed back to her room. Her tiny captive began struggling even more intensely, but she held him firm. "No need to be afraid, my lord," she said nonchalantly. "I've never hurt a man before, not even one as deserving as you are. That being said, if I find that my lessons don't teach you to behave courteously to a lady like me, I might have to make an exception to that."